Hello.
Hi. So hi Sarah. So you've agreed to do an interview with us from Wokingham Borough Libraries. Thank you so much for giving up your time. So can you tell our readers and our general public a bit about you and your work and how you got into writing and how you go about writing your books?
Well, I write lots of different books and they all happened kind of differently. So I think the one that we're mostly going to be talking about today is the new Mirabelle Bevan mystery, which is a 1950s murder mystery series that I started writing. I wrote the first one was a short story that I wrote for my dad for his birthday about, I don't know, probably 9 or 10 years ago now. And as I was writing it, I was like, this could be a book. And then as I started to write the book, I thought, this could be a series. And so it's kind of grown like Topsy. Highland Fling, the new one that's out, is number 8. And basically I write one of these a year, and they're kind of like Miss Marple with an edge. My detective Mirabelle's been called Miss Marple with an edge, or Miss Marple in high heels, sometimes people call her.
You coined the phrase crime noir, so like
cozy crime noir.
Cozy crime noir.
So I was trying to explain it to somebody and I said this phrase, and then the next thing I knew, I think it'd be in the Times or something, and somebody was like, yeah, Sara Sheridan's cozy crime noir, and I was like, I think I'm the only one that does cozy crime noir. I'd always loved Agatha Christie. I mean, growing up, I read Agatha Christie even as a kind of kid, maybe 10, 11 years of age. And this is very much, coming from that tradition. And I have a high level of imaginative engagement. I don't like books where they, go into great detail about violence or skinning people alive or any of that kind of stuff. And so for me, traditional crime books are a much better read because you can emotionally sort of engage with them without it being truly horrifying. I think everyone has their own level of that. And also I'm really interested, I write other historical fiction, mostly set in the late Georgian, early Victorian era as well. So I'm kind of interested in the 50s as a way of comparing those two eras, the first one being the beginning of the British Empire, very much that empire rising up, and then the 50s being when sort of the empire began to tail off. And of course, it's such a big influence even today on our culture that this is these two times are really interesting to me. So yeah, there's lots of reasons to write about the 50s.
Yeah. And surprisingly, for a character set in the 1950s, Mirabelle is really quite up and with it, and the things she's talking about are still relevant today, which is really brilliant because you can see the patterns that you've identified and brought through from the writing. But just generally, how did Mirabelle come about as a person, as a character? Because she's really multi-layered and faceted and just an amazing character to read.
Isn't it? It's one of the joys that you don't just get one shot. You get book after book, and every book you can go into different characters and their backgrounds and see your characters play out together. So instead of one novel, a standalone novel, it's 100,000 words, you've got to get all that 100,000 words. You've got book after book after book, so you can really work on that character. And Mirabelle started as a real character. She started as a real person my dad had seen on the beach in Brighton when he was a kid. His granny used to live in Brighton, and he'd gone down to Brighton and seen this woman on the beach, and he had this memory of her post-war refusing to pay to sit down on a deck chair at the beach at Brighton. And she was very well dressed, and he as a kid looked at her and thought, why isn't she just paying? She's obviously got this like penny or whatever it was to sit down on the seat. And he mentioned this to me, and that's what prompted the original short story, was about this woman and how broken up she was after the war, and how she damn well wasn't going to pay to have to sit down. And that's the first scene in Brighton Belle, and that was the short story. And then gradually he unraveled with a bit of Miss Marple and also a lot of that 50s glamour. I'm really interested in the world of women in the 50s. This idea that you had to put on lipstick and get back into the kitchen, two things that don't necessarily go very well together.
No. Anybody who's tried cooking in makeup, it just falls off.
Terrible idea. And also not only that, but I think the idea that many women in the in the 40s during the war had done these really tough, difficult jobs, and then suddenly they were supposed to step back and become this sort of iconic female sort of mid-century person. And that I think that was kind of interesting to me all along, because of course my granny and my mum and my aunties and everything, they were young in the 50s. So that's kind of interesting. It's sort of about where they came from. And I suppose for me, exploring that was fun.
Lovely. So one of the latest books you've written is Where Are the Women, which looks at Scotland's history, but from the women's point of view.
Yeah.
Having heard what you've just said about Mirabelle, how fun was that to write?
I had the best time. It was crazy because it was on a very short deadline, and initially they had it's supposed to be like a non-fiction book, but it's creative non-fiction. So I remapped Scotland. It's a guidebook to Scotland, but nothing's named after men. Everything's named after women, and they initially gave me 55,000 words, I think. And I kept phoning the publisher up and saying, "Can I just a little bit more words?" So yeah, another 5,000. I'm like, "Oh, great, that's great." And then about 3 weeks later, I come up and say, "I found more amazing women. Could I have another?" And I ended up at 80,000 words for this book because there were so many amazing stories that I wanted to get in. There's the stories of 1,200 Scottish women, many of whom I hadn't heard of before. And I'm kind of horrified by that because female history is something that I write about all the time in these two periods. And so yeah, it was great fun, but it was really hard work because it was on a very short deadline. There was no sleep, but I really enjoyed it. And also writing that book made me quite angry because now I walk down streets and I see like 6 statues to men and I'm like, where are the women? And it drives you a bit crazy. You become a little bit bitter walking around your hometown when there are more
I suppose when you've
animals.
Done all that research into everything, it's there, like, and it's in your head
here. And in Edinburgh where I live, there where this is now, there are more statues to animals than there are to women, which is insane. Like we have 2 dogs, we have an elephant, a bear, sort of various statues. There's a horse statue, and there's hardly any statues to actually named women other than sort of women who are just nameless, Justice or Peace or something like that.
Oh, okay. Are we going to see any of the women you wrote about in Where Are the Women in Highland Fling, which is the new Mirabelle that's out in June?
No, you don't actually see any of the women there, though it was really interesting. There were only a couple of rules to remapping Scotland, and one was the women that you write about have to be dead. And of course, some of the women who were around in the 50s were dead, but a lot of them are still knocking about. So I feel like there's an update to happen every 10 years. You could take a part of a generation of these women who have died. It was also really interesting because it took me back to lots of places in Edinburgh and actually right across Scotland that were part of my parents' lives. And so I look at them now thinking where I'm putting a statue, and that was also like, well, what was it actually like before? What was it like 10 years ago or 50 years ago or whatever it was. So.
Oh, sounds really good. So are you able to give us a bit of an overview of what Highland Fling's going to be about, or is it a complete secret?
No, it's not a secret at all. Highland Fling is it's a country house mystery. I've always wanted to do a country house mystery for the Mirabelle Bevan series. And I love when Agatha Christie does country house mysteries. And it's a country house mystery set in the Highlands. It's the first time that I've written Scotland in the series. Sometimes Mirabelle goes away other places. She's been in Paris and she's been in, Cheltenham, and she's been in Cambridge and various other places. This is the first time that she's come up.
You've
to
sort
Scotland.
Of brought her home to you.
Yeah, and it was fun for me actually writing Scotland because it's where I live. The country house in question is outside Inverness. So she's right up in the Highlands, and her squeeze right through all of the books is Detective Superintendent McGregor. Alan McGregor is obviously Scottish. He really comes from Edinburgh, and one of the things that we think or have thought so far in the series about McGregor is that Mirabelle's very high class. Her parents come from Belgravia, and she was finishing school, and she's super posh. And we always think that McGregor maybe isn't as posh as Mirabelle, and he's not perhaps quite so classy. But actually, his family come from this Highland estate, and this is his cousin's house. And so he and Mirabelle are coming up to Scotland to have a holiday together. And of course, when they arrive, it looks like it's going to be a great holiday. It's going to be whiskey, it's going to be cashmere, it's going to be all the good Highland things. And they get there, and of course, somebody
there's
dies.
A dead body.
Yeah, dead body.
Oh, it sounds.
Have you read it? You read it yet, or is it still coming to you?
No, it's still still coming to me. I've pre-ordered my copy, so should wing its way to me on its release date.
Yeah. It should be out in June. I'm hoping they still do the June release, but of course we're COVID crisis, so
yeah,
we have to wait and see what they do.
So we'll have to see. One more couple of things I want to just touch on a little bit. So you've done 2 children's books now. One called I'm Me, yeah. And the latest one, Monsters Unite. Now, Monsters Unite, which is about the Loch Ness Monster, effectively, you wrote with your daughter Molly, and how was it coming about? How did you form that story, and how was it writing with Molly, if any of that came through?
It was fun writing with Molly. The story was based on a story I used to tell Molly. To tell Molly stories all the time. And when she was little, she's in her 20s, late 20s now. And one of the stories I used to tell her was about, wherever we were, I would make up stories. So when you're in Scotland, you quite often end up a lot at some point over the summer, and I would tell her stories about different monsters. And so I was at a book festival on Islay, which is one of the Scottish Highlands islands, about, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I met this guy in the bar who I thought was another writer, and actually turned out to be a publisher. And I told him this story, and he was like, I would love for you to write this down. And so we got Molly on board because it's part of her memory of the story, and also my memory of the story. But it also turns out that it's been hugely relevant as well, because politically, because obviously we're in a time of Brexit, and the story is Nessie finding a network of tunnels underneath Loch Ness that connect her to lots of other European monsters.
Yeah.
So at the time when I told Molly this story, made up this story initially, it wasn't about that at all. But of course now, so we had the launch on March last year, so about a year ago, and that was the day we were supposed to come out of the EU. We actually didn't come out of the EU that day in the end, and it became a bit of a rallying book actually for people talking to their kids about what was happening. Although I think that the monster stories in particular are quite good fun as well.
Yeah,
did you get
beg your pardon?
Did you get all that? Is it okay?
Yeah, I think so. I went a bit iffy, but I got all the bit about the Monsters Unite, which is the bit that we really wanted. So if you've got one bit of advice for any writers out there, what would it be? Anyone who's looking to write their own story.
You just need to get on with it. I think you spend a lot of time saying, you've got to be in the right place, and you've got to get this, and you've got to do that. No, just do it. I've written over 20 books now, and you just have to get on with the job. If it's something you want to do, it's a job, and you have to sort of get on with it. And also when I'm writing, a lot of the time I think, what do I want to know next? I'm not a great planner. I'll get Mirabelle up to the Highlands and think, well, someone's got to die. Who's it going to be? I won't plan the whole thing out in advance, and that for me is really important, because it means that the story is fresh to me as well as I'm writing it. So for me, it's about what do I want to see next, or what do I want to read next if I was the reader, and how would I want that to happen? What's the best way for that to happen? And I'm in my writing very focused on how I as a reader would like to get the story. So that's certainly the way that I do it. But ultimately, I know a lot of writers, and the truth is everybody does it differently. So people find their way to do it. But my thing about get on with it and write something that you would love to read, that's kind of how I do it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Which explains why your Mirabelle series is so gripping to read, because you're writing it as if you're reading it. So
I mean, I'm a reader. I never meant to be a writer. I was always a reader, though. For me, it's about that I'm quite focused on that reading experience, and I get annoyed when I'm reading somebody else's book, and I think this could have been a lot better. Why doesn't it happen this other way? Would have been much more interesting. Or that you've got to engage people imaginatively, and that's really what it's about. So, do you want some Monsters Unite stickers? Hang on, I'll show you. I've got.
Yes, please.
Email me an address and I'll pop them in the post to you. You can just use them for younger readers if they want to.
That would
If
be
they want to,
lovely.
yeah, we'll do that.
We'll put those in the libraries, and if you want a sticker, you can come along and get one when we're back open again.
A sticker, you monsters.
So thank you, Sara, for spending the time to talk to us. We've got a full range of your books in the libraries, in Wokingham Libraries, and we've got Highland Fling, which is out in, I think, on the 20th of June this year.
I think it's June. I'm not sure what date.
June. Anyway, we've got Highland Fling on order to come into the libraries, so hopefully we'll be back open and people can come and borrow your books. But they can get Kindle copies, can't they, from Amazon if
yes,
they want.
They can. They certainly can if they want to. And that's the 8th book, so there are 8 books to keep you busy during that damn lockdown.
We've got 8 books of downtime. Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Sara.